My name is Cristina Kim, and I am the Engagement and Collaborations Manager for the Center for Investigative Reporting.
And I'm Christa Scharfenberg. I'm the acting CEO of the Center for Investigative Reporting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about our organization and then share with you how we have really transformed our newsroom into being kind of driven by impact and hopefully smarter about how we think about it and how we track it. And then we're going to show you some examples of stories we've done where we've tracked the impact, had a lot of impact and tracked it and really used it to inform reporting that's come afterwards, and show you a tool that we've built that we're here to share with other newsrooms as well. So the Center for Investigative Reporting, I'm going to call it CIR for shorthand because it's a long name. CIR was founded 41 years ago. We're in the San Francisco Bay Area in the United States. We're a nonprofit investigative newsroom. We have about 70 people on staff now. We're multi-platform, so we do sort of deep dive text, print investigations. We have a public radio show called Reveal that's on close to 500 stations across the United States now. It's 1 hour of investigative reporting every week. We also do documentary film production, a lot of data-driven reporting, interactive data apps online. So we work kind of in every medium. We cover a wide variety of topics, so environmental reporting, criminal justice, money and politics.
Anything to hold people accountable.
Yes.
You can't do anything wrong.
And we really sort of thrive on creativity. We think a lot about how to tell our stories to reach wide audiences. We experiment frequently. We do a lot of collaborations with artists and local news organizations and community groups to really try to tell these stories that can be very dense and long, but to tell them in a way that get to the people most affected by them and really reach new audiences. So that's what we're all about. We are nonprofit, so we're funded largely by big foundations, smaller family foundations, individual donors, and we've just launched a membership program recently to get smaller dollar donations from people, which kind of factors into the impact work. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So I got into journalism, it was a little roundabout, but my father was a journalist in Boston in the US, and growing up, I saw how he and his colleagues really affected daily life in the city. He worked at the Boston Globe, and at that time the newspaper was really kind of the moral voice in the city, and I saw how they were able to kind of shape issues and really make a difference. And I ended up at CIR not because I sort of set out to get into journalism, but my friend was running it at the time, and I needed a good job a long time ago. And I got there, and I just realized, like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be, and this work really, it really does make a difference. The issues that we're reporting on changed. The organization was very small when I got there, and now it's much bigger. But the kind of through line the whole time was really having an impact. When I got to CIR until recently, the way we thought about it was, each person kind of defined impact on their own. Each reporter tracked the impact of their stories on their own. We weren't sharing that information across the organization in any sort of coherent way. And I'm not sure for around the world, but certainly in the United States, the funders who are funding journalism care deeply about the impact of the work. And that kind of pushed us to think about how do we define our impact? How do we measure our impact? How do we talk about the impact that we're having? So I think about 4 years ago, we brought on a researcher. She had a fellowship to work with us for 2 years. And that was her whole job, was to think about how do you define journalism impact, and how can this organization sort of lead the way in thinking about it and measuring it and sharing that with other newsrooms. around the country and around the world. And so she sort of built a framework for us, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and then this tool that we'll show you too to make it, very simple for every reporter, every editor, everyone in the organization to sort of keep up to date on what's happening as a result of the reporting that we do. Do you want to?
Yeah. Oh, here we are. And can I control it? I can't. So I'll just go like this to make it move. I can? I can't.
Not moving.
Bueno. While we figure that out, we'll talk about, our mission for the Center for Investigative Reporting, which I think Christa was getting at, and I'll just read it to you, is the Center for Investigative Reporting seeks to engage and empower the public through investigative journalism and groundbreaking storytelling in order to spark action, improve lives, and really generate impact. And so impact is a huge word. It just means a change in the status quo as a result of a direct intervention. In journalism, that can take the form of a story, a radio documentary, a video documentary, an event series, whatever the case may be. But that's a very large umbrella. That just essentially means change, and when you define it in such a broad way, it's almost impossible to track in a real, granular, and nuanced way. So Lindsay Green Barber did this amazing thing where she broke it down. She created an impact framework. And the way she broke it down was into 3 levels of impact. The largest one being macro, which obviously as investigative reporters means laws are being changed. There's a real shift. A policy is introduced, so something very large. And often in the past when we've talked about impact, we only think about macro impacts, which is great, but we're missing so much. And so that's when the other levels are really helpful. So the second level is the Mezzo Level. This is the community level. So are people talking about it? Is there, tweet storms happening around it? Is a public official talking about it in a community meeting? That's already in this middle ground that sometimes we just think it's, oh, that's a really great outcome from our reporting, but we don't track it. And the last one is micro, so the individual level. Did you get an email from someone who read your story, and as a result of the story that you published and wrote, they are now more active in their community, or they change their viewpoints? So thinking about those 3 levels allows us to understand the ways that outcomes and change actually happen. Because what we've seen over time is that when we're tracking the micro, the meso, and the macro, we see how they're all linked together. There is no macro change without micro change, and as journalists, we can often forget that. And so something that Lindsay Green Barber really helped us understand is that we need to track all of these levels in order to have a real understanding of what our work is doing for the world and our local communities. And we're going to I'm sorry that we don't have a slideshow that we prepared for you, but
let's do this after when we get into the tracker.
Okay.
We can go back to this because it's a little hard to explain.
Sure.
So the reasons for us for tracking impact, which we hope kind of makes sense for all of you too. First is, as Cristina was saying, is to really understand the real changes sparked by your work. And when we show you some examples of our projects, if we hadn't been tracking kind of these micro, meso, macro changes over time, we wouldn't have realized that our reporting was leading to these outcomes sometimes a year or 2 later. So it's really getting a deeper understanding of how your reporting is contributing to change that's happening. We work really hard to use the data that comes out of this tool we have to inform future reporting. So it's not the only thing we use to decide what stories to do, but as we understand better which stories are having an impact, it helps us choose. If a reporter is thinking about 2 or 3 projects, really being able to think about, well, which one of these has the most likelihood for really mattering to people and making a difference in the end, we'll theoretically go with that one. And we found it's really helped us to build trust with our audiences. I mean, as you know, there's so much information out there. People don't sort of know where to go, for a trusted news source. And so if for us as an investigative newsroom, the projects we do can take 6 months, a year, 2 years to happen, but we follow the impact of those stories. We try to stay on them over time. And we found that really helps the audiences sort of trust us. We're not just dumping a big project on them and then moving on to the next thing. They feel like we're staying with these stories over time. And then for us, it's a huge tool for our fundraising. How many of you are from nonprofit newsrooms? A few people. It is the centerpiece for how we raise money from big foundations, from individual donors, is being able to talk about, the why that we do this work. It's not just telling the story. It actually makes a difference in the world. So we're going to talk about a few projects, walk you through a few projects and how we've sort of built impact into them and then used our learnings to inform the next story we've done.
Great, so I'm going to talk to you about one of our case studies. It was a reporting project called The Dark Side of the Strawberry. It was published in November of 2014 by Bernice Young, Kendall Taggart, and Andy Donahue. And what they found is that in California, in Salinas and Oxnard, California, which is where a lot of our agriculture, especially strawberry production is, what was happening is that they were using pesticides that are called fumigants. Fumigants are poisonous gases that were actually developed for warfare during Vietnam, but have been found useful by farmers by injecting them into the soil, which then allows for greater and larger strawberry production, which is like a multi-million-dollar industry for California. Of course, these gases release out. They don't just stay in the soil, and unfortunately what we found is that there's a loophole in the law that's allowing the levels of these fumigants to be far higher than they should be by law, and they're particularly impacting these, obviously, agricultural communities. What you're seeing here is Oxnard, California. This is Rio Mesa High School. You can see that it's surrounded by strawberry fields, and what we did through our investigation was found that they were at 20 times the level that they were supposed to be. But nobody knew about it, and the community really didn't understand that fumigants were even being used and what the health repercussions were of that use. So before we even launched our investigation, we actually partnered with USC, the University of Southern California, and we surveyed people who lived in these communities and tried to understand what their level of understanding or know-how was of the fumigants that were being used. And most people really didn't know that what was being used at all or even about this loophole law. So we did that, and as we developed our investigation, we met people. We partnered with The Guardian, which was our national partner in order to get the story out there. But we also did some local work. What you see here is Jenna Welch. She's our director of Storyworks, and what she did was work with the high school students of that high school, told them the information that the reporters were learning, and then worked with them almost in Teatro Campesino. Is everyone kind of familiar with that? So Teatro Campesino during the UFW strikes with Cesar Chavez was a way that Chicanos in Central Valley were spreading information and news, and they did it through theater, through reproducing the story through play acting. So really using that model, we worked with the high school students to play act the news in order for it to be theirs and to really understand it. And the teachers union actually got very involved as a result and became one of the biggest advocates in the community for really holding the government accountable to making sure that these fumigants weren't used. So this was one of our engagement strategies, and the idea behind it is like, go where people are. The news should be accessible, and if it's not understandable by the communities that are impacted by it, then what's the use for it? The second thing we did was partner with the Ventura County Star. So we had been resting on our laurels a little bit, and we thought we partnered with The Guardian. We're good. This is going to get everywhere. Impact's just going to roll down. That wasn't what we learned from tracking it. It was actually the Ventura County Star that, when we did the survey again, 32% of the people we surveyed found out not through The Guardian, but through actually the local paper. And so that was an insight that we've really taken since 2014 onward, that you need to do creative engagement, such as play acting, and you need to really partner with local community newspapers in order to actually make sure that your information is reaching those that are most impacted. And I just have to talk about this. So that was in 2014. So because we were tracking the micro, the macro, and the meso, and all the outcomes that have been happening as a result of that story, we continued tracking it years later. So that the law that was allowing for the fumigant use finally got off the books. Like now they actually have stricter laws, and that got passed in November of 2017. So that's 2 years after we first even published this piece, and so I think tracking impact is really important because sometimes the work that you're doing has a much longer tail. And you know, the newsroom cycle, you forget about it, you're on to the next one. But you really need to be tracking it because your work is really changing the world. But if you're not looking for it, you won't even remember to like understand that. All right, and then this is our most recent investigation. So some of the insights we're still kind of learning from, but what we did was apply what we learned in strawberries to Kept Out. So Kept Out is just published this year. Our reporters, Aaron Glantz and Emmanuel Martinez, looked at over 31 million records from the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act records. And what they found is that in 61 metro areas in the United States, there's evidence of modern-day redlining. What that means is that African Americans, Latinos, and in some places Asian Americans and Native Americans are actually not being given conventional home loans. So they're just being closed out of the conventional home mortgage market, making it them unable to buy homes. So we knew that this story is obviously a national one, but we also knew that it's a deeply personal one, because what we did was we were able to track where and in what areas this was happening. So the first thing as a national audience reader you're going to want to know is it happening in my neighborhood? Is it happening where I grew up? So we worked and created this interactive map where you can type in your address and find out the likelihood of you being denied if you're Black, Latino, Asian, or Native American. So this was an interactive way, more digital strategy for getting people the news personalized for them. And we also have something called Amplify, where people can actually text in their address and get a bunch of information about their particular neighborhood, as well as like the national findings we had found in our methodology. And finally, taking some of the lessons that we had learned from strawberries and recognizing like this is a national story and we're telling the national story. We distributed it on our radio program through AP, which is the Associated Press of the United States, so all over. And we even had it on the television on NewsHour. But we were telling, you know, the national story, and we had focused in on Philadelphia because we had partnered with WHYY, which is the public radio station of Philadelphia. However, we wanted to make sure that this data was available for everyone. So what you're seeing here, that's actually Emmanuel Martinez, who was the data reporter who did all the digging, explaining both to local journalists, both radio and press, as well as housing advocates, about how to actually use this information for their own reporting, but also for their own work. So again, really thinking about a local strategy and making sure that, you know, all the work we're doing is really reaching the communities most impacted.
So the big takeaways that we've had from doing this work our first, as Cristina was saying, is partnering with local news organizations, and that's really where we find we have real-world impact. So if you're a national or regional news organization, building those local partnerships and getting the reporting to the people most affected really makes a difference. If you are a local news organization, then you've got all the power right in your hands to do this work. All of the creative engagement that we do, like the plays and working with artists, and we've, like with the strawberry story, delivering postcards to every house in the zip codes around the area that we were reporting on, really makes a difference, because then people who are affected get the information they need to go sort of push for change. And then really thinking about stakeholders, who are the people that are going to care about this story ahead of time, really helps us. So for example, the working with local journalists and housing advocates that Cristina was just talking about with the Kept Out series, we had a whole series of webinars, so pulling people together, I think 4 or 5 times, like big groups of people, to share the data, show them how to use it. And doing that ahead of time led to all of this local reporting in addition to ours. So local journalists were able to take those stories, or take the data and create their own local story. And then, we find by tracking, we just have, as Cristina was saying too, we have access to information, like connecting the dots that we just wouldn't have been able to do beforehand. So we're going to show you how we connect the dots now.
Yes, so we built this thing called the Impact Tracker, which I'm going to try and connect to now, and we'll have our fingers crossed. there it is. It actually worked, and you can see it. Okay, so what is the impact tracker? So Lindsay Green Barber, she created this framework for us, but then she wanted to create an easy way for our reporters to actually track the impacts they were doing beyond their Excel sheet, and in a general database so that all teams could look at it and see the long tail of all of our work, right? It's not just one story, but all of our stories. So we created the impact tracker, which you can see here. This is our demo. And it's really easy to use. All you have to do is log in. Reporters don't need to log in with a password or anything. They can just go straight to this. They say submit outcome. And then they have to write a description of it. So let's see. Give me a description.
Community meeting.
Community meeting held as a result of kept out. The date of the impact when it actually happens. And then what the reporter needs to do is actually track it if it's a macro, a meso, or a micro. So for us, because we're an investigative newsroom, we've really tailored the way that we define the macro, the meso, and the micro to our needs. But it's a really nimble tool, and it can work for a local newsroom, for somebody who's doing more features, for anything. But for us, we're investigative, so we've created some of these tags. So again, hearing, institutional action. So here, a community meeting was held. Let me fix that. And so that's definitely for us a meso. Let's see, content used in a public meeting. Perfect. So that's it. That's all the reporter would have to do, is describe the outcome itself, label it within one of the impact meso, macro, or micro categories. It could be a media one, which means perhaps your story was picked up by another location, mentioned and or copycatted, in which case you would maybe put that publication here as well as the link. But in order to make sure that you can actually track your work, you would select a beat. So in this instance, it would be housing for us. A subtopic would be the title of the series. So for us, it's kept out. And then tags are for anybody to use. So we like to use our reporters' names so that they can track their impact across all their stories. And I'll show you what that actually looks like beyond just this simple form. But great. And so then that's all you have to do. You reviewed it, you save it, and you've logged your impact. So what does that look like in the greater scheme? So if you wanted to see the overall impact, what you would do is you would go to the impact log, and you would render a timeline chart. And let's say we only want to look at everything from kept out. And we apply it. So that's all of our outcomes. Oh, I feel like it's not filling the whole screen, but this is all of our impact outcomes that we've had from kept out. And then if we were to render the timeline, here it is. You can see, I wish that you could see. I don't know, it's like kind of an exploded screen, so maybe if I do this. Okay. So then you can actually see, like, the story was published in, and this is for kept out. You can see that we can track what these little images are. So this is a media mention when it looks like a little newspaper. When it's like a networked tool, that's a meso impact that we logged. You can click into it, and you can actually see what it was. So this is actually for strawberries, and it says this is the Society's pages, a sociology blog, cites CIR investigation on strawberries, and an article about strawberry shortcake. So good impacts, guys. But what we could see and what we were able to infer from this chart, like the reason we were able to know that partnering with the Ventura County Star led to greater macro impacts is because we were able to track it on that visualizer and see that it was only after that we partnered with the Ventura Country Star that we were able to have those impacts, that it wasn't the Guardian partnership, but actually that local one. In addition to the rendering timeline, which again gives you that screen, we also have this. This is our new visualizer, which when you log into Google Analytics, will create a line that lets you see your web traffic in addition to this more visualized chart of your macro, meso, and micro and media impacts. So macro is this magenta color, meso is this orange, and then micro is that kind of lavender that you're seeing. And then media mentions and just kind of like overall distribution is that blue. So again, this really allows us, and I think you can speak to it, to see and actually have like editorial strategy in a way that if we weren't tracking it, we wouldn't be able to see. And I'm going to go back to this so you can actually see it a little better. So again, really easy form for journalists, editors, everyone to use so that we can get these insights. So that's actually what you'll see, and you'll see it much more clear this way. That red line, again, is web traffic and page views. And then, again, we're really able to see like the spikes in terms of like audience engagement on our digital site, and then the way that our work is having impacts in the real world. So that's our, yes. And that's our tool in itself, which unfortunately is hard to do a demo live right now, and I apologize, and I'm happy to stick afterwards and actually go in the tool with you so that you can actually see the full screen. But if you are interested in just learning more and you go to this bit.ly, what that is, it will take you to a Google form so that you can start to define what micro and meso and macro impacts mean to you, and someone from our team will actually work with you to customize an impact tracker for your newsroom based on what you think and you want to track and how you define impact, again, for your newsroom. So you might want to visit that. It'll just take you to a Google form. Yes.
So one thing that maybe we should have said a little bit more explicitly at the beginning, but you know, sometimes you do a story and immediately, you know, someone the next day calls for some reform or change, and you know very clearly, like, my reporting led to this happening. But other times, like with some of these stories, it really is over time, and being able to see how, you know, community members kind of getting engaged in the issue, building, you know, to community meetings, to maybe public hearings, to, you know, you can really, with the timeline, you can start to see. Because sometimes, you know, you'll see something happen years later and think, well, we were probably a part of that, but we can't really say definitively, you know, how the reporting was used. And you start to be able to connect the dots and see how the kind of interest is building over time and you know, leading to some change at the end of the timeline. So, you know, for our newsroom, the thing that has been really essential to starting to be more impact-driven in this deep way is to make sure that everybody is involved. And so, you know, the leadership team plays a strong role in telling everyone again and again, you have to use this tool, because we really rely on this information for our fundraising. The editors and reporters, obviously, are the primary people who are sort of putting in the information and tracking what's happening as a result of the stories. The audience and engagement team, which Cristina is a part of, are using this all the time to think about how can we, you know, sort of design our engagement in a more and more effective way to reach people. And then the fundraising teams, and you know, it's just essential. This information is essential for them in their work. So. Switch to the next one.
Oh, yes. Apologies.
So I think whether you wanted to use our tool or a tool like this, or just want to start thinking about being more impact-driven yourself, you know, the big challenge is getting people, you know, everyone on board with thinking in this way about the work that you do. And so some of the things that we've just found help and can help you get started are really celebrating impact internally. So we try regularly, like we have a staff meeting every Monday morning for the whole organization, and we always talk about at those meetings if there's been some outcome as a result of our reporting, and you know, sending emails around to everybody so that there's, like, people get recognition when something happens as a result of their work, and you know, it feels good, I think, to be recognized, and so constantly sort of talking about it internally. Also, it's really important to assign a couple of people in the organization to really drive this. Like, somebody has to be responsible. Lindsay, who we've both mentioned, who used to work with us when she was a full-time staff person, everybody was like on it. Since she has left, you know, we found that sometimes we'll start, just full disclosure, you know, people get a little lazier about it, and so you really need one or two people in the organization to kind of champion this and make sure whenever you hear that, you know, something has happened as a result of your reporting, saying, remember to put it in the tracker. He's like, somebody has to be a kind of nudge. And then starting small. So, you know, for all of you, thinking about, if you're not already doing this kind of, thinking about it in this way, is like, pick a project or a beat and really commit to thinking about the impact ahead of time and then tracking it over time. And I think if people around you start seeing what that looks like, it helps to get more buy-in from your colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Great, so we can take some questions, but before we do, I just want to say, sometimes when we say impact-driven newsrooms, we get the question like, but you're a newsroom, you're not advocates. You have to walk a fine line. You're reporting, but you can't, be pushing for a certain outcome. And that's true. We don't do that. We are not advocates. We're an investigative newsroom, and we are just distributing content. However, I think by defining ourselves as impact-driven, it's really made us be more aware of just how we distribute our stories and how they are accessible and how news can be useful. And I think just thinking about it that way, and again, identifying who our stakeholders are and who's most impacted by our findings, has led us to become an impact-driven newsroom. Not that we're advocates, but that we're really conscientious and really thinking about how we push out our information and who we work with.
Yeah, thanks. Just a really interesting presentation. Just two quick questions. So one, if I understand correctly, you can set up an impact tracker for other organizations to use. Okay, great. And the other would be, how do you choose what and when to communicate about your impact to your readers, so online? Obviously, you probably don't write a separate article for every tweet mention, but like for, when law gets changed, you probably write an article about. So what about with those micro, meso impact? How do you communicate? Do you like write each month a small article about a project and what were the impacts, or what do you do?
For now, you're right, we don't write an article every time somebody tweets about our stories. That would be really boring. But we do, like with the Kept Out project on redlining, there was quickly a bunch of activity, so we waited a few weeks and then we just do blog posts, once there's something interesting enough to say or enough things have happened that we think it would be interesting to our readers. We also, with our radio show, it's every week, so there's 52 episodes a year. About 32 or 34 are brand new original episodes. The others are repeats, but we call them impact shows. So we choose stories that we've aired previously where impact has happened, and then we update them to talk about what's happened since. And we hear from our listeners that they really, that's what I was saying about they love that we come back to these stories. Like we really do follow them over time. A lot of the work we do is terribly depressing and dark, and it's all kind of rape and murder and corruption. And I think showing people that we do these stories because they actually can help contribute to righting injustices, people really value that. As I mentioned earlier, we're developing a membership program now, so for people to give us small dollar donations, and one of the member benefits is like an impact update. I think we said we would do it quarterly, but we have to actually get those on the schedule. So for people who are actually giving us money, a more formal kind of report back every couple of months about the impact.
And then at the end of the year, we also do kind of an overview, or at least we did this year, of all the impacts our stories have had, and we go back back to 2014 and really communicate it out that way as well. But also the tool is, the tool is open source, so if you go to the website, you can customize it with us, or you can just download it and play it around for yourself.
Is this now the only system you use to track your success, or do you have a more traditional dashboard with podcast subscribers as an indicator as well?
Yeah. We have both. So we have been a little behind the times in having an actual dashboard, but we're developing one now so we can see all of the platforms we work on in one place. And that's more about just audience reach and the kind of pure numbers. This tool gets a little deeper into, as you saw, a different kind of information, and so those are the two primary tools that we use.
Though this tool now integrates with Google Analytics, as you saw, or I tried to show you live, as well as it feeds into Meltwater, which is our clipping service. So it's automatically updated by all our media mentions, as well as copycat stories, et cetera, et cetera.
Second question, can you talk a bit about how you came up with those 6 or 7 categories for micro, meso, and macro? Like, how did you?
I'm going to go back to that slide.
How did you define the ones in the drop-down menu?
Yeah. So this, when it wasn't working earlier, we were going to show you this. So these are just how we define the 3 buckets, and as Cristina said, totally customizable. So if you did this yourself, you come up with these categories. And I think it was really just the editorial team, you know, the editors, reporters, spent a lot of time thinking about it before we set it up. I believe you can change it as you go, too.
Yeah.
So you have to start somewhere, and then you can get more sophisticated as you're using it and realizing what's actually helpful. So yeah, I mean, I think we thought about like what typically happens, what are the kinds of things that can happen after our reporting, and started there, and then it has sort of evolved over the years. A microphone, yeah.
2 short questions. One question, did I understand well that your impact tracker is an open source tool?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. So you just provide help, but we actually build what we need to build. Okay. And could you lead us a bit through your micro and meso impact parameters so that we understand what you had in mind? What is first, how do you measure attitude change? How do you measure increased awareness and knowledge?
Sure. So for attitude change, that could be our reporters get a lot of emails, they get a lot of tweets, and sometimes it really is like, until I read your reporting, I, didn't believe in DACA, or I didn't understand, an immigrant's plight. That's an attitude change. That's all we need. We just need somebody to attach the email or the tweet. That's enough for us. In terms of increased awareness and knowledge, if you're seeing your story be tagged repeatedly on Twitter or on Facebook, or you just know that people are talking about it, that's also an increased awareness and knowledge. But you are getting at something which is true, which is when the reporter is tagging it for themselves, it is a little bit of a subjective call. But what we think is that it's better to have that in order to see the greater waves of impact, because it's not that individual instance that we're so interested in. It's how they're all talking to one another in order to create even larger waves of impact. So there is a little bit of that judgment call, but that's how we're doing it. It's just, especially at the micro level, through individual interactions with our reporters.
And we did, early on in developing this work, with the strawberries story, we did something which is completely unrealistic to do regularly, but in that community, I think Cristina referenced this, we did a survey with, we worked with a university program of students from USC, University of Southern California, to do a survey ahead of time with residents in that community about their knowledge of the issue, and then after the reporting was in the Ventura County Star, that local paper, we also did a lot of work in Spanish language radio in that area too. We did a survey afterwards to see how people's awareness had changed, and it really had dramatically. We also delivered postcards to every household with our key findings, and that community was just not aware of the chemicals that they were being exposed to every day ahead of time. I mean, it's invisible, they didn't know. And afterwards we saw, I can't remember the percentages now, but it significantly increased awareness. So we can't do that on every project, but it showed us that if you work really hard to get the information to the people who need it, understanding can shift over time. So then there's kind of an assumption built in there that if you're getting some individual feedback that people have shifted their thinking or changed, that's probably happening on a broader level too. It's a little bit of guesswork, but.
Did you have a question? Yeah.
I wanted to ask, has this impact-driven approach increased your funding? And there's 2 parts to that question, kind of your donor funding, but if you could talk a little bit about your membership and engagement and how this has had an impact that way.
Yeah. Do you want me to talk about funding?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I would say it probably has increased our funding. We, so maybe 5-ish years ago, something like that, impact became the thing that funders in the US, funders of journalism, I mean, funders in every area care about. You need to be able to prove that you're making a difference and that you're worthy of their support for good reason, totally understandable. That did translate into journalism too, that's the fundamental question that people ask. And when we started being asked that question, like in the past, in my earlier years at CIR, we would always just say very vague, like our reporting changes laws and changes lives, but we had no way of proving it. And so we realized we had to get smarter about proving it. And we, with the help of this, of Lindsay, the fellow that we had, we realized we were in a position to be able to define that. I mean, the funders didn't know how to think about this for journalism organizations. They were basically saying, you tell us, what does impact mean to you? How do you measure it? How do you communicate it back? And so we tried to kind of define the space a little bit, and because we have been sharing this tool with so many other newsrooms, I think there's 40-something using it now, like collectively we feel like we've been in a place to define it for the funder community rather than funders defining it for us, and most funders have wanted that, you know, they've wanted us to, so we've sort of created a, collectively with all the newsrooms using it, a framework that I think a lot of funders have bought into, this whole idea of how you do it. So we have, I mean, the organization's size has been pretty steady for the last 5 years, but we're getting more and more larger grants and multi-year grants, which didn't used to be the case. I think because there's more kind of trust and belief in our work over time that it's important. So it has become essential for fundraising for sure, and I think it has helped deepen our relationship with our existing funders and attracting new ones too.
And in terms of engagement, I mean, I think it's engagement which is actually tied to funding. I think we've become quite well known for creative engagement. So in addition to what you saw in terms of like the Amplify and the theater, we do comic strips for Instagram. We're actually putting a comic in the bus shelters in Philadelphia that actually gives data on redlining there. And we've also been incredibly collaborative in terms of sharing out how we do our engagement. Like we were working in New Jersey and Mississippi and all these places, and then really working with local newsrooms to share like what creative engagement looks like. And that also translates to how we even do our kind of engagement meetings. We do these things called design sprints, where our engagement team, the reporters and the editors all meet together early on in the investigation to, again, identify stakeholders, both like general audience to like particular individuals, and we think creatively about how and where those people are already getting their information in order to, again, creatively engage them. And that goes far beyond just like clicks and links on a page and more about really understanding it. And that is actually also linked to some of the funds that we're getting. We've gotten a lot of grants because of that creative work and because of our commitment to reaching communities.
Can you talk about how you go about the problem of correlation and causation? Do you have it internally sometimes that a law is passed and then you argue, was this actually because of our reporting or would have happened anyway? And how do you discuss this?
Yeah, we try to be careful, you know, I mean, there are, when we're lucky, literally the next day, like a senator will stand up and say, you know, this reporting from CIR, and we know, you know, we feel comfortable then saying it had an impact. We try to be careful in the language we use if it's over time and it's obviously a piece of the puzzle and there's a lot of other things happening in the world. We can say our reporting helped lead to X, Y, Z. So, you know, sometimes it's very clear, sometimes it's a little murkier, but we can at least say, here are the ways we know our reporting helped get to this place. But we try to be humble and not say it was all because of us.
Right. But we can also like make inferences. Like, I don't know, when you're looking at the media, like our publication date, and then you see how many other outlets distribute it or start doing their own localizations, like that for us is an indicator that we started the conversation that is leading to people being aware of it.
And I'd say too, unlike a kind of daily news organization, often we're doing stories that nobody else is reporting on. Like we are creating an issue where there hasn't necessarily been one before. We're in a unique position in that way. And so it's not like 20 newsrooms are already reporting on this issue and who knows what part are played. Like the strawberry story, nobody else was reporting on that. So we can pretty clearly tie our work to whatever happens afterwards.
I think this side needs some love.
Thank you. You define yourself as an impact-driven newsroom. So I'm wondering, like, how it has shifted journalist mindset and the way we practice journalism, starting by thinking of impact it may lead instead of starting with the idea of the stories.
Yeah.
So how journalists are picking stories and choosing stories that may lead to a social change, and how is it in the newsroom?
Yeah, I'd say it took some time. You know, early on, that was very uncomfortable for a lot of reporters, for sure. But I think we have, you know, proven ourselves over the years to be this kind of creative place and trying to do things in new ways. And so we attract journalists now who are interested in that. I mean, everyone who comes to work for us comes because we're doing all this like weird stuff. So they're bought in. I mean, some people have left over the years. I mean, even when we launched the radio show, like people thought we were crazy and that it was too big of an undertaking. And there's a few, you know, really good reporters left CIR, and it was sad to see them go. They were accomplished, but it's like, this is where we're headed, and so you're on board with us or not. And even the older, more traditional, I don't mean old just in terms of age, but just the more traditional journalists, you know, some people are more engaged in this than others. I mean, we find, I think the reporters who really own it are the ones who are more of kind of a type A personality. You know, they want to be out there, they have big egos, they want people to know, like, I did this work and I'm getting credit for it. And there's other people who, you know, prefer to be behind the scenes a little bit. So that's a bit of a, you know, it's just an internal challenge of managing those different personalities. But I think, you know, for us in the US, like the industry has just, you know, collapsed and is being rebuilt now. And it's, so many people are bringing so much creativity to thinking about the future of journalism that it doesn't feel abnormal anymore, I think, to be thinking in this way. And we still choose stories that we're going to do based on, like, what are the best stories? I mean, journalism is at the heart of everything. But if you have a choice between two, and, you know, two potential projects to work on, and one is going to affect more people, and there's clearly like things that could be done to fix the problem, I think it's an easy decision to go with that one for reporters. It's a piece of the decision making. It's not like the whole, it's not the only way we decide what to work on.
But I have to ask, why are you a journalist? What made you want to be a journalist? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What is journalism for? Yeah. Why people are choosing to enter that business, and what is it for? Yeah. And it's also the whole debate and discussion today, like the use of journalism for social goods or as a business, and so that's
yeah. Well, and I always say that you know, I think people think that journalists are kind of cranky, and especially investigative reporters, that they're sort of pessimistic people. I actually think journalists are incredibly optimistic people. I mean, you do this work because you believe it's important. It's important for society. It's important for democracy, or at least democratic principles if you don't live in a democracy, and that it can make a difference. And I don't know that they all like to admit that they're actually optimistic, you know, have a vision for a better future, but I think at the heart of it, that's why most people do this work, really. It's like to go after the bad guys. It's to like make the world better.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to understand what's the volume of the publications that you're doing, how many themes you're having at the same time, and how many pieces of articles, videos, whatever you're producing are actually putting out every day, every week, every month. What's the frequency?
Yes, so the radio show is our most frequent. So that's every week, 1 hour, like we have to do it or there's going to be nothing on the radio. So that's the most consistent. Most of our journalists, there's like 25-ish, 30 investigative reporters. Most people are doing 1 or 2 big projects a year. And everyone's expected to do a blog post here and there. I mean, we're not a like newspaper or daily news organization, so it's not like a kind of site that people would come to every day. We try to go where people are and then bring them back to us to go deeper into our reporting. So we have something new probably
every week.
Every Every week?
I think every week with our blog posts recently, I think we've been getting a lot of hits, just also because of Trump. Like, we are often responding to something, so I think our pickup has been a little more than usual, but our long investigations, like Christa is saying, it's a luxury. Our reporters really get to dig in for a year or more. Yeah? Is that, oh.
My question is about the impact of the new technology and the digital tools on the way of investigating, because since last 10 years the journalism has changed like in a lot of terms, but there was like traditional investigation that you have sources, you got a document in the government and to reveal the corruption or scandals or something. But now it's more into the big data and the digital tools, augmented reality, virtual reality, and there's so many tools too. So how it has impacted and how it will be in the future on the way of investigations, and how it will be the future of the new technology, especially on the investigation.
If we had a golden ball.
I know.
I mean, for us now, we've got a team of 5 data reporters, I think 5, the team, 4 data reporters, who both do their own projects and work with the rest of our newsroom. And just as an example, like the Kept Out project was like the perfect kind of project for us, because it involved these 31 million records about home loans basically made across the country. I mean, no matter it was about every neighborhood, every country, every city, every state, every neighborhood in the entire country, and could be localized anywhere, by news organizations, by individual people, and that's like the perfect project for us. It's rare, and it's completely possible because of the movement towards data-driven reporting. I mean, we got all those records, but we worked for, I don't know, maybe a year to make them make sense and be consistent. And that's, it's only possible through all of these technology tools. And so we try to look for those projects, but it's, they're kind of few and far between. So for us, it allows us to tell these big stories. I mean, I think it's essential to doing, and we still do some stories that are based on, someone handing someone a document. I mean, that happens too. But the scale of stories we can tell now is just so different with access to technology tools.
I mean, we have a whole data team, and they are trained very differently than some of our print and radio reporters, right? They're doing statistical regression models in order to be able to look at 31 million records and actually glean some insights from it. So I think what you're maybe getting at is like new tools, new skills, different way of approaching like source material. And again, we're really lucky to have a team of 4 people that have different skill sets but can respond to data in a way that the rest of the newsroom can't. And I also think that there's some reporters, we're partnering with academic institutions more and more and trying to see like what are the linkages between journalists and PhDs that are have very interesting methodologies but maybe can't be doing or have enough time to go a certain avenue. And I think in the future from CIR, there's going to be a lot of exciting collaborations that allow
that's a good point. We launched this about a year ago, and there's a lot of researchers that have access to data that journalists can't get, and so it's a really great partnership for both sides, because we get information we wouldn't be able to get otherwise, and they get to, by working with us, stories are told, they're able to reach an audience with their work that's just so much broader than academics can typically reach on their own.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what could be an effective way to track the impact of an individual freelance journalist story?
Well,
So,
interesting.
I am a freelance journalist, and I do not have any sort of newsroom or group of people. I work alone or sometimes together with 1 or 2 colleagues. So it's it looks quite difficult to track the impact of a story, but it could be quite important also in order to, I don't know, probably to improve our reliability or something else.
That's really interesting. I don't know if an individual has ever gotten the impact tracker for themselves, but again, like the tool is it's the framework, right? And it's customizable for you. So this could definitely work for a freelancer if you wanted to just use it, create your own tracking method. So I don't know what macro would look like for you or micro, but you could track like, my story, went to this outlet and then this outlet and then this outlet in this time. Based on that partnership, I'm looking at the timeline, looks like Le Monde now wants me. Like you could start tracking the way that your partnerships and where your stories are going for your personal work. But then the onus would be on you if you want to look at the outcomes of your individual stories and tracking that impact. But it could work. In fact, that's actually a really interesting case study. You should do it and then tell us about it. Well, great. I think we're wrapping up. I think it's like 2 minutes. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
And let us know if you have questions.
Thanks.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So this will take you to, yeah, it's a bit.ly.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. So that's the form, but if you go to www.revealnews.org/I think impact tracker, you'll find it. But email us if nothing else, and we'll gladly talk to you more about it.